Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and your podcast co-host. Well, this week we have a very interesting episode for you that takes a look at some of the big items in the news these days, the conflict or the ceasefire more recently with Iran, and the ongoing California governor's race, and the debate over budget and fiscal policy between Democrats and Republicans in Congress, and we look at it through a communications lens. Because if you think about it, all these issues in politics relate to communications ultimately, and just about any issue that you're dealing with in your daily life, from the corporate boardroom to negotiations you're making at home with a contractor, even your kid, they all relate to persuasion and communication. And we have a very interesting guest to talk with us about all of these issues, and his name is Josh Bandoch. Josh is the head of policy at our sister free market think tank, the Illinois Policy Institute, and he, in his research hat, does a lot of work researching on poverty, and we talk about it in the interview. It has a very personal meaning for him, and it's a lot of what we do here at PRI relating how all of the big government energy policies, for example, and a lot of the policies coming from Sacramento are really increasing burdens on people who can afford them the least. And that's people living in poor and rural and minority communities. Josh is the author of a terrific new book, which you can pre-order right now on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller, called How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion. And he shares some great examples from his book and also relates them to these hot issues in the news that at the end of the day, all relate to the power of communications and persuasion. So I think you'll find it a very interesting discussion. So stay tuned. After this message, we will have our great discussion with my colleague Matt Fleming and I with Josh Bandoch on how to get what you want. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates, so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Josh Bandoch, welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Matt and I are very excited today to have you on because, obviously we're communications professionals at the highest level of politics and state government. So we love to geek out when we find a kindred spirit with which we can talk about communications and communication strategies and tactics. But we're also thrilled, that you've written this terrific new book called How to Get What You Want. And our listeners, it's coming out in a couple of weeks, but you can go on right now on Amazon and pre-order your copy, and we highly encourage our listeners to do that. And for our listeners who maybe aren't as much into communications, find it daunting, there's a lot of great things in it for you. So maybe let's start our discussion with what prompted you to write this book. What were you hoping to accomplish with your book, and why should the run-of-the-mill listener out there who may not be a communications expert or especially interested in these sorts of issues, what are they going to get out of your book?
The subtitle of the book, it's How to Get What You Want, Master the Art and Science of Persuasion. And why is persuasion so important? Because persuasion is the difference between having a good idea and having other people embrace that good idea. And whether you are in your personal or your professional life, whether you work in the policy space or sales or communications or you're a leader or anybody, throughout every single day, in every interaction, you're trying to persuade people to do something or to not do something. So it's everything. And what motivated me to write the book specifically was that first, with my time in academia, I saw so many super smart people that somehow just weren't persuasive, really high IQ, and some things were missing. And then fast forward to getting into the policy space, same thing. Lots of brilliant ideas, tons of data to support them, really just logically written white papers. And look, those things are all helpful and necessary in a certain way. And I realized that they were in no way sufficient, that having a great what is, it's worth little if you don't express it persuasively. So it's about the how you talk about your ideas. And so I think so many people reach their ceiling because they don't talk about things effectively. And this book is meant to empower people to crash through that ceiling and to just reach new heights professionally and personally, because this stuff works in human beings. So to just crash through that ceiling and to achieve a lot more.
So you talked largely on a personal level, and having read through the book, you're talking largely on a personal level. To sort of expand this out a bit, to bring it into the news, obviously yesterday was a tense day. I think probably globally, with the peak of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. And we're not foreign policy experts here, and certainly I'm not asking you to opine on that. But at the end of the day, a negotiation, whether it's between two possibly warring countries or a husband and a wife, it's still communication. And I was just curious, like having looked at what's been happening with Iran and the United States, if you were advising Trump on communicating with Iran, the rest of the world, allies and maybe not allies, and also with Americans, I mean, what would you tell them? How would you use the principles written about in your book to sort of help bring about world peace? Because I would think at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants, is to live in peace.
Yeah. Hey, maybe if I give a good answer, a Nobel Prize is coming my way, right? No, just kidding. So I'll grab a couple of, I think, the most applicable principles in the book, and we can apply them here or anywhere. And I'll put, say, a communications consulting hat on, so not a politics hat. So if I were advising President Trump or any high level elected official in a really tense situation, but let's just focus on this one, what would I do? So a couple things. The first is you have to really understand your audience, or in this case, your audience is. Is his audience the Iranian regime? Is it the Iranian people? More one or the other. That's gonna point you in one direction. The American people are his audience. The military is his audience, because they're actually doing this stuff. The rest of the world is the audience. There are allies, they're part of the audience, and also nations who tend to be not so friendly to us, they're also the audience. So lots of different audiences. As you want to really understand them and figure out what you're trying to get them to do or not do. Then what you need to do is you need to have a vision for how things will look when you get done with, in this case, right, not technically a declaration of war, but certainly warlike activities. So what's the vision? Say, what's the vision for Iran? Is it a vision for the Iranian people of, if we do this plus you do your part, Iran will look this way? Is it a vision for the Iranian regime that if you reform, you can have this and this? What's the vision for this for the military? What is this going to mean for the military? If you do this successfully, it means X, Y, and Z. And if we don't succeed, it means X, Y, and Z. Even what is success? How are you defining that? And what is your vision for success? So you have to craft that, because people have to know where you're going. And one of the principles in the book is that vision animates action. So whatever you're trying to get people to do, whatever action you want them to take, they need a vision, they need to know where you're going. And then related to that, I think that President Trump or anybody needs to be for something. What is he trying to achieve exactly? And how is he for those things? Is he for freedom in Iran? Is he for, more commerce in the Strait? What is he for? Is he for the U.S. military flexing its muscles to show that it remains by far the best in the world? What is he for? X, Y, and Z. Be for those things, so that when he goes and talks to the American people, to our European partners, whoever, he can lead with those things. And then I would say finally, so that I don't, dump too much in this just now, tell stories. Tell stories about the courage of our men and women in uniform, of the warriors. Tell stories about, say, what things could look like after this. Tell stories about, say, people in Iran, if you know that they're suffering, or you see some brave people who are doing courageous things. tell those stories and celebrate them.
So on the flip side of that, right? So you have the president selling his vision for the Iran effort and making the case, on the side of either a peace deal or a potential conflict. But then you have at the same time you have Hakeem Jeffries and Charles Schumer and Democrats in Congress and in the various governors' offices, and generally their world is built in opposition to the president. So when you're the opposition, what's your advice to them? How do they communicate when you don't always want to be negative? You want to be able to tell stories, have a positive vision, but when you're the leader of the opposition, your job is to be negative. Your job is to say no, to say why what the president's doing is the wrong approach. What I'm doing is the right way to go. What's your communications advice to them in this kind of, well, really tricky time communications wise if you're a leader of an opposition with troops in harm's way?
You got to strike a balance when you aren't the one in power. In this case, we're talking politics. So, Democrats in Congress, you got to strike a balance between, criticizing the status quo and having that positive vision for where things are going. Because the question is, do you want to go from opposition to being a future leader who is in power? And if the answer to that is, yeah, I want to be a future leader who's in power, as opposed to somebody who simply is interested in criticizing, and you can point to people on both sides of the aisle in American politics who seem only interested in that. If you want to be a future leader, you want to try and take the reins and make things better, you have to ultimately have that positive vision. So sure, suppose that you're a Democrat and you think there's some real problems with what the president is doing in Iran or on any domestic issue. To some degree, you have to criticize those things. And incidentally, being negative is normal because we're wired with something called negativity bias. So human beings are wired to be attentive to, sensitive to, concerned about negative things or things that they perceive as negative. That aligns with our wiring. And if you want to be a future leader who makes a big difference, then you have to have a positive vision. And I try to capture this usually by asking people, so I'll ask you too, who were some of the most persuasive Americans of the last 100 years?
Well, certainly Ronald Reagan, JFK.
Barack
You could go
Obama.
to, yeah, Barack Obama. You could go to the business world, right? You could go to Lee Iacocca or people like that, right? Sam Walton,
Yep.
those kind of people.
100%. And the first three that you mentioned are like three of the top five people always say. They say JFK, they say Martin Luther King Jr., they say Ronald Reagan, they say Barack Obama. No one ever says Walter Mondale. No one ever says Malcolm X. No one ever says Barry Goldwater. No one ever says Al Gore. Right? People always say those people. What do they have in common? They were happy warriors who ultimately had a positive vision for how things would look. JFK said, "Ask not." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." Ronald Reagan saw America as a shining city on a hill. Barack Obama talked about hope and change. And his 2004 speech to the Democrat National Convention was a masterclass in persuasion. So they were four things. So I think that ultimately, if you're a Democrat in Congress right now and you oppose what the president is doing, you still need to have a positive vision for how things will look if you're the one running the show. Because if you don't have that, people, the tendency to say, well, fine, you don't like that. I get the criticism. Like, what are you going to do? Why is it better? Because bad ideas always beat out no ideas because bad ideas still have some good aspects to them. And if you have no ideas to add to the conversation except criticism, people don't know what you stand for. And so that's not going to motivate anybody but those who already agree with you to support you or to vote for you. And if you're in elected office and you want to grow your coalition, you can't only speak to the people who already agree with you. And even the ones who already agree with you, they still need something to be for, something positive to motivate them to act, as opposed to simply everything's terrible and come, join me in my fight to show how terrible everything is, but I don't have anywhere to point you. So, hey, sorry about that.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
So one of the things that I think when we met gifted you a lot of credibility in my mind is that you are a policy advocate who has a similar worldview as us in a state that is very similar to ours. We're advocating for policy for, I'd say, free market policies in California, whereas you're advocating for free market policies in Illinois. And it's funny that people give a lot of communications advice, and I'm not saying the communications advice isn't good, but when you have all the things going your way, it's a lot easier to be an effective communicator than when you have almost nothing going your way, and that's what advocating as the minority in an overwhelmingly whatever colored state. We have the challenges as free market advocates in California, the same challenges I'm sure that more whatever the opposite of free market would be in, say, Mississippi or something like that, right? So we have similar challenges ahead. I mean, so when you are advocating in Illinois, how do you try to build consensus on something that you're working on, not only with a majority that doesn't share your worldview, but also with elected officials who have every incentive, not to work with you?
It's a foundational question. Would you serve a vegetarian veal?
No.
Would you force feed somebody who keeps kosher bacon?
No.
So I say this because the way to persuade somebody is not to offend their values. And morality works a lot like our taste. So just like we have 5, maybe 6 physical taste receptors on our tongue, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, and maybe fat, ole augustus, we have wired into our hearts and minds 6, maybe 7 moral tastes, values, so to speak. They are care, essentially concern for suffering, equity, which is a concern for equal outcomes, proportionality, a focus on hard work and merit, loyalty, in-group, out-group, authority, essentially respect for hierarchies, purity, things that are sacred versus things that are disgusting, and then liberty, essentially the ability to live as you choose. And these are largely up to 60% wired into us, but no less than 30%. It's genetic, a lot of our values. So I say that because I don't hate somebody who's not 7 foot 6 inches tall with red hair or 4 foot 3 inches tall with green hair, because that's also wired into them. So this is all to say that you have to understand somebody's values, and folks on the left and the right, on average, have distinct, non-overlapping political values. So folks on the left, they tend, on average, I want to underline that, on average, tend to be sensitive to concerns over care and suffering, say concern for the dispossessed, and then equity, a concern over equal or unequal outcomes with a preference for equal outcomes. And then to a certain kind of liberty, which is more about like the welfare state, giving people things that they need to quote unquote be free. Conservatives have a totally different moral palette. Their moral palette is one of concern over proportionality, hard work, and merit, loyalty, in-group, out-group, think like patriotism, authority, respect for hierarchies, sanctity, think like the Bible Belt, and then freedom more in the sort of traditional American sense of like being free to do what you want. There's no overlap there. Libertarians have a narrower but overlapping moral palette with conservatives. They're focused on proportionality and freedom. So I say this because as free market folks, I love the free market. I think it's amazing. It's like the most beautiful thing, one of the most beautiful things that's ever, graced mankind. It's an amazing thing. If I advocate for free market principles, like a free market conservative to progressives, it's going to be extremely ineffective because it's like me force feeding a vegetarian veal or force feeding someone who keeps kosher bacon. It's actually deeply offensive. So what do you do instead? You have to understand your audience's values and appeal to them. Okay, super abstract. What does that look like in practice? Let me give you two examples. One of which I know is a hot topic in California, probably more than anywhere else in the country. Second one, it's a national topic. I don't know how hot is it in California, but you'll tell me. The first is housing. The second is occupational licensing. So Illinois, like California, has a housing affordability crisis. And that is driven, I think, by low supply. And that's driven, I think, in large part by burdensome regulations that make it difficult to build. Part of the happy consensus is that a lot of folks in left and right, they see that housing affordability is a problem and they see that low supply is a problem and they see these regulations, well, they're kind of a problem too. Okay, good. Nonetheless, if I go to progressive Democrats in Illinois, California, anywhere, and I say, hey, look, the reason that you should reduce restrictions on housing, say like e-zoning restrictions, permit accessory dwelling units, whatever it is, that you should, make it easier to build those things is because people should be free to do what they want with their property as long as they work hard and they create value and someone wants to do that. Why would you stop them? Okay, so those are claims that you could make to conservatives. Fine. What would I say instead to progressives? Well, I would appeal to their care and their equity taste buds. So take Chicago. Chicago has a still fairly restrictive policy on building accessory dwelling units. And it turns out they made some improvements last summer, but before that, the policy was, among other things, deeply inequitable. And we actually did research on this showing that it's way harder to build an ADU in poor neighborhoods and in minority neighborhoods, and that those are the areas where housing affordability and quality housing are more acute needs. So I wrote an op-ed showing how the current policy, which does restrict freedom, is also it's inequitable and it's uncaring. So you have to frame things in those terms. Second example, occupational licensing. I think that occupational licensing is a government permission slip to work in a sector. And I think that those burdens are oftentimes either way too big or altogether unnecessary. If I wanted to advocate for reducing or eliminating those burdens with a conservative, I would say, look, freedom and hard work, proportionality. If I go to a progressive though and I say, look, we need to reduce these burdens, I would say that they're inequitable and they're uncaring. Why? Well, how can I say that? Authentically, because this is really important. We'll come back to that in a second. Data from the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis show that blacks and Hispanics are disproportionately by like many percentage points. They are disproportionately harmed by occupational licensing laws. So that actually by definition makes them inequitable. And those laws hurt the people that they're in some ways meant to help, or they hurt the people who can least afford to be harmed in that way. And that's poor people. So I say that. And that's way more likely to resonate with a progressive than if I come at them and say freedom, freedom, and hard work, hard work.
Yeah, for what it's worth, occupational licensing is not as big of a hot topic in California, but you do actually need a food handler's license in order to be a dishwasher. So
Well, okay.
I wish it was a little bit more of a hot topic because it's obviously a very onerous burden on a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you're kind of talking through that. This is actually how I kind of think of these things. A lot of the work that we've done here at PRI. See, I believe free market ideas really lead the foundation for the forging of more political balance in the state, more political consensus. It's on things like housing policy. It's on things like energy policy. It's on things like school choice and the science of reading. We've seen real progress made in achieving the types of reforms we would want to see. It may not be a Republican Party victory, but it nonetheless is a victory for the types of policies that we want to see. And I think that leaves well into kind of one of your areas of research and one of the ways that, when we talk about big government energy mandates, for example, and we have all these questions right now about, why are gas prices so expensive these days? Why are they so much more expensive in California? All these concerns over cost of living. Well, it's the result of bad government policy. And when we talk about 100% renewable energy mandates and gas car bans and things like that, yes, those are terrible policies for so many reasons for the economy, but it's also a huge driver of poverty and inequality. And And, we're seeing that California policies are making affordability worse, especially for those living in poor communities, rural communities, minority communities. They're impacted so much worse by these bad energy policies than those on the coast. And ironically, it's the people who claim to be fighting for them are the ones that are imposing these policies, and also the ones who aren't doing anything about it when confronted with these realities. So, share your thoughts about the importance of poverty here and why that's such an important topic for public policy, and especially for those of us on the free market side of things.
Poverty first is it's personal for me because it's seared into my family's history. My mom grew up dirt poor. My grandmother raised 5 kids by herself. They were so poor that they literally had to count pennies. My mom wondered if there were going to be presents around the Christmas tree every year because most years there weren't. And that poverty scarred my mom and her sibling. They bear those scars to this day. And the suffering that they endured, it pains me to know that they suffered in that way. And poverty for me is the antithesis of opportunity. And so I want an economic system that will ensure that as few people as possible experience poverty, and as many people as possible experience as much opportunity as possible, an abundance of opportunity. And the happy reality is that we know what that economic system is. It's an economic system that has pulled not thousands or millions, but literally billions of people around the world over the last couple hundred years out of poverty. And that's capitalism. That's the free market system. So I guess the first is that it's just so deeply personal for me. It's also like poverty is antithetical to the American dream. And the American dream that this is a land of opportunity, that you can pursue happiness, and that is what makes America different. If too few people believe in that dream, then it turns into a mirage and then it goes poof. So we have to care about poverty, because if there's too much poverty and too little opportunity, people start to look for something else. They reach for ideas that I think are ultimately bad for people. And what you've said is 100% right, which is that many of the policies that are intended to help poor people end up hurting them. So I think it's really important to press on that. And that's incidentally one way to be more persuasive with folks on the left, is to talk about how current policies hurt poor people, how they hurt the people that they're meant to help. Like, take lots of social welfare programs. There's, for example, this thing, it's mostly a federal issue because most social welfare programs are federal, called the benefit cliff. And the benefit cliff makes it economically rational and psychologically understandable for poor people to reject opportunities, to reject raises, to reject promotions, to reject any kind of professional improvement, because sometimes a $1,000 raise can cause a family to lose, for example, in Illinois, $25,000 in childcare benefits. That is like radically unjust. So we have a welfare system that essentially incentivizes people to reject opportunity, and that's just totally crazy.
It's interesting. We've done a lot of work on kind of the push for basic income programs in California, which are not promoted like Milton Friedman would talk about them as a more efficient replacement for government social welfare programs. They would be in addition to in the various California models. And our Damon Dunn wrote a terrific book for us several years back called Punting Poverty, and he talks about these issues. He grew up very poor. He talks about eating mayonnaise sandwiches and such, and he says that all of these programs are not focused at all on economic empowerment or opportunity. It's just about making you more comfortable being poor. It's the right way to look at these things. It's not about helping people climb the economic ladder and making the situation better for themselves and their families. It's really, we would talk about the California versions of these programs. You're about paying people to stay poor.
A couple years ago, I went to what was supposed to be a panel, me and a guy from a progressive organization, and we're going to be talking poverty and opportunity. He had to bail last minute. but they had already driven lots of turnout from their folks. So I get into this room and it's just a room full of progressives. And for 45 minutes, they just beat me over the head with guaranteed income, guaranteed income, guaranteed income. And I wasn't initially prepared to talk about that, just hadn't really been thinking about it. And I was like, kind of like getting beaten around and trying to defend myself. And I said, wait a minute, hang on. Okay. And these are all mostly kids in their 20s, smart kids, like really smart kids. I mean, they're just lots of awesome questions. And I said, all right, so I got a deal for everybody in this room. You can take your current salary, you can index it for inflation plus say 1 or 2%. So you're going to be doing really well economically, especially over time. There's one little caveat here. You can never work another day in your life. How many of you would take that deal? Any guesses how many hands went up?
I would hope to think that the audience made the right choice in the room there, but
They did. 0 hands went up. And
that's great.
I said, gotcha. I said, not one of you would take that deal because you know that work is foundational to human flourishing. So I say this because there is this odd irony where a lot of folks who push these programs are okay with effectively kicking people off of or telling them to not even step onto the economic ladder, which is wild. So you mentioned guaranteed income. Only one place in the country has a permanent guaranteed income program, and that's Cook County, of which Chicago is the vast majority. Cook County now has a permanent guaranteed income program. The really sad irony of that is that Cook County did a pilot. Just before that, a private organization did a pilot in Illinois and Texas. And here's what that pilot found. It found that people who participated in the guaranteed income program and received the monthly payment, their workforce participation decreased by over 4 percentage points, not percent, but percentage points. That's a big time drop in people working. They also reduced the number of hours worked. So if they were working fewer hours and they had less earned income. On every independent, in the sense of personal independence, economic metric, these people were way worse off. The city of Chicago then commissioned somebody to do a report on their guaranteed income program, which actually wasn't even limited to low-income people. It expanded into the middle class as well. And rather than discussing the economic harms, they just kind of had some survey data about, well, hey, people kind of like this. They felt a little better, and they went ahead and made the pilot permanent. That pilot will only grow in terms of how much money people receive per month and how many people are eligible for that pilot. And all these programs do is encourage people to step off the economic ladder, to not climb, to not rise, and do exactly the things that all those really smart young progressives know deep down are absolutely necessary for their individual flourishing.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
Bringing it back to communications on a more personal level, one of the big techniques that you focus on in the book is listening. It's not surprising that that is part of communications, although definitely it seems counterintuitive. Communications, I think we often think of as us talking, right? Or maybe nonverbal communication, which is sort of talking silently. So much of our opportunities to be persuasive, though, come from us talking, right? Can you explain a little bit about why listening is an important part of this? And then also how you can incorporate listening into situations where you are going to be doing most of the talking, like a job interview or giving speeches.
Absolutely. Let me capture why listening is so important with a story about an intern from a couple of summers ago, John. So smart kid, nice kid, went to a good school. And for the first couple of weeks of his internship, John thought that the best way to show how smart he was to wave his hand, make sure he was always called on, and even interrupt not just his colleagues, colleagues, bad enough. Interrupting me, it's like, okay. So after it happened a couple of times, I, kind of talked to John, tried to do the Yoda thing and said, is this like the best approach? Like, do you like when people interrupt you? And he was like, ah. So John kind of flipped a switch a little bit and started to actually listen and not talk first. And he started to really understand what the team needed, what he needed to do to be a high performer. And it instantly made him much more likable. Although it was funny, one day he came in and he said, you never guess what happened last night. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, I was talking to my girlfriend last night. She's having a problem with her internship. And she started telling me, and then I just started talking. And she got really annoyed with me. And she said, why can't you just listen? And the light bulb went back off. I was like, oh, I'm doing it again. So first I just listened and I just let her talk and started to feel a little bit more reconnected. So then I did a little bit of active listening, just asked her some how and what questions, just to really more deeply understand her and what she was experiencing. And I said, well, what are the biggest problems you're facing with the internship? How do you think your boss feels about all this? Okay. We talked about that. I understood better because she's the one experiencing this, not me. And then it's okay, well, I do want to try to get us towards some kind of resolution here. So I said, well, what do you think you should do? How do you want to proceed? What are some good next steps? And she outlined those things and we talked them through. And I don't know, I guess I'll find out tonight, but I hope it worked. John did such a great job in just really flipping to being a team first, listen first person, that he was the only intern that we offered to keep on with a promotion. So John learned to listen first. And he was a good example of becoming what I call the ultimate listener. So that's why listening is so important, because that's how you connect with people and you demonstrate understanding of your audience and you understand who they are and what they care about, because you get what you want by appealing to your audience. You don't serve the vegetarian veal. You serve the vegetarian a great salad or Indian vegetarian dish with lots of spices or whatever they like. So how do you listen effectively in situations where it seems hard to listen? So you mentioned job interviews and speeches. I think actually with job interviews, you want to start by listening, which seems really weird. I once got a job at I think, really good place by listening 90% of the time. I just asked the guy some questions and he just talked and talked and talked. And I just sat there and smiled and nodded. And he also told me lots of really good information. So I would actually start by inviting listening. So if you can, if they don't just jump right in and say, okay, I have some questions, I would start by saying, do you mind if I just ask you one question? And they'll say, no, what's up? And then say, what's your story? And this is an extremely powerful question because we are story processors and they will tell you their story and it will do two things. The first is that it's going to help you feel and help them feel connected to you and to them. So it'll start to form a little bit of a connection to a complete stranger who's considering like offering you a job and making you part of their team. And they're going to give you so much gold to work with when they tell you what their story is. They're going to tell you about how they got at that company, what they like and don't like. You're going to get such a clear sense of who they are that you're going to learn as you answer those questions, the things that you should press on as opposed to things that you might not want to press on in your answer. So I think even in job interviews, and then at the end of job interviews, you want to ask a couple of really important questions, which give you the opportunity to distinguish yourself from other candidates. So the first question I recommend asking at the end is, it's essentially called a proof of life question. And you got to listen really hard here. You're going to say something like, look, you've gotten a lot of great applications and you're talking to a lot of strong candidates for this position. Why me? And if they don't have a good answer to that question, then you're going to learn that you're not a strong contender. Hopefully, they're going to say, well, these two things really stood out about your application. We're in the policy space. You have phenomenal data skills. And I love that, you've done some on the ground work in X or Y or Z. And then that's your opportunity just to press on those things. Maybe you didn't talk enough about your data skills. You want to reemphasize that you're like a data beast, or that, this is a couple of things that I really learned from my practical experience. And then I would also ask them the question, look, 1 year out, you look at whoever you hire for this role, me or somebody else, and you say, this person was so phenomenal, we got to hire 10 more people like them. What does that look like? And they're going to tell you essentially what their ideal candidate looks like. And then when you've listened really hard, you pick out the key things and then you reinforce for them that that's you, that you in fact can do these things. But if you don't listen to that, then you're not going to know what to press on. And part of the trouble is that we like to tell people what we think is so important, even if those things are totally unimportant to them. Okay, how does it work for speeches when you really are the one talking? Well, you have to do a lot of pre-listening. Well, by that I mean pre-event listening. So you have to really understand your audience. One of the things that I always did as a speechwriter is whenever possible, I would set up a call with somebody on the team of the organization we were going to go speak and understand the audience. Who are they? What do they care about? What are their wants? What are their needs? What are their interests? What is their perspective? Because, I was once a speechwriter for somebody who always said, what do we need to tell them? And it's like, well, that's actually backwards, because it's actually what do they need to hear from us? So if you do all the homework beforehand, your audience is going to think that you are really talking to them in a way that is magical. It's so powerful because you did listening before you even talked to them. You can also do all that research online. If you're going and talking to an organization, look at their social media, look at their website, understand who they are and what they care about, and appeal to those things authentically.
That's right. It's interesting how many people don't realize when you speak to an organization, that little bit of work it's not done so often. And you can tell when someone is just coming in and kind of phoning it in or giving their stump speech, which, yes, your goal as a speechwriter is you don't want to have to write 47 original speeches. A stump speech is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But just having an awareness of, it's communications 101 in anything that you write. It's not only, of course, it's what's your goal, what's your objective, what do you want to get out of it, what do you want to get across, but it's also who's your audience and how you say it, the language you use, the examples you use, the people you call out. Maybe there's history there, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's someone who's had history with you or your boss who's going to be in the audience that day. How do you navigate around that? So it can be very simple, but it can also be a lot of layers of the onion when you're asking that question and finding out that information about the audience.
Especially because so few people do that. So many people go in and they give the canned speeches, whether you're a politician or a keynote speaker or whatever. And when you personalize it, and it doesn't require that much to personalize these things, it still might be 90% the same speech. And then taking that 10% and really tailoring it to your audience, particularly at the beginning, because if after 3 or 4 minutes you don't have your audience locked in, then they're on their phones or they're doing whatever it is that they're doing. They're not paying attention. So you got to connect with them right away, and you make it personal and you connect and you make it specific. And then they're like, whoa, it's like they're talking to me. Whoa, that's amazing. Okay, I'm going to listen. Which that is so powerful, whether it's a personal or professional engagement.
Well, as we close, even though we're in the middle of 2026, in the middle of one kind of hot political year, I don't know that political years ever really end in our politics these days, but we're already looking ahead to 2028, and we certainly have the governors of both of our states seem like they're going to be running for president. Gavin Newsom certainly is, well, one who tries to give off the appearance of listening, but he likes to do most of the talking and impressing. But we don't know a lot, especially those of us out here in California and on the West Coast. We don't really know a lot about J.B. Pritzker. So what should, as we begin to focus on 2028, what should our largely California audience know about J.B. Pritzker, what makes him tick, and his prospects as our next president?
Let me step back and give a little bit of a framework of some things he might want to consider. And I don't want to be too political, so maybe I'll give a little bit of a rubric, and then we could use Illinois as an example. Could use California as an example too. A couple of things I think I would look for in a potential president. I would want to know if they really understand their state, let alone their nation. So are they able to listen, and do they truly demonstrate understanding of what people in the state are experiencing? Super important, because if they can't even listen in a state, how are they going to listen nationally? It's going to be real hard. And then I would ask if they have a vision for their state, and what is that vision? Because ultimately it's vision that animates action. So we talked about even earlier with Iran, it's like, well, what is the vision for Iran or the military or whatever? What is that vision? Do they have it, and can they articulate it? Are they for something? Because it's fine, say, to critique the current president if you're Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker or anybody else who fancies himself a potential president, are you for something? And if so, what is that? Are they likable? Is this somebody that you think could get things done with Congress and on the national scene and with international leaders? Because the US president remains by far the most powerful person in the world. So we rely on that person to deal both with our allies and adversaries. So how would that person do on that stage? Those are the things. What might we look at in states? I mean, I think one of the most powerful metrics that we can look at for any state is do people stay there? Do people move there? Essentially, what are the migration patterns? Because people in a free country like America get to vote with their feet. They get to say, I love Illinois, California, I'm going to stay here. Or they look at other states and they can say, oh my God, California is so amazing. I'm going to move there. Illinois is a hotbed of everything. I move in Illinois. Conversely, they could say, this state doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me so much that I'm going to pick my family up and move. I'm going to move across the country and take a crack at a new beginning because this state is it is not working. And I think the sad reality in both Illinois and California and a number of other deep blue states is that hundreds of thousands of people per state have said, this state is not working for me so much that I'm going to leave and I'm going to move to a state that, among other things, promises more freedom. It promises more prosperity. It promises more opportunity. And it does that with both reducing the burden on me through regulations and taxes and things like that, and offers more opportunity through things like a better business environment, a better economic environment, more jobs, a better educational system, school choice. And people are voting with their feet and they're moving away from states like California and Illinois and New York, and then moving to states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee and South Carolina that offer those things. So I would look at, are people even staying in the states where these governors currently reside and where they currently hold the governorship?
Well, it's a lot easier, of course, to move from Illinois or California to another state. It would certainly be quite difficult for us to move to Australia, Europe, anywhere else if, one of these governors presiding over large out-migration were they to become president.
Well, it is easier to move from California and Illinois to Florida. It's still really hard. Think about what that means. You're leaving your family, your friends, your community. People do not make those decisions lightly. So for somebody to say, look, my home, oftentimes it's your home. You grew up there. It is not working for me so badly. I got to find a new home. That's a really big thing. It's a really big thing. And people, they agonize and they literally shed, just rivers of tears as they leave states because they feel like they're leaving everything behind and they feel like they have to because they don't see a future in that state. And so they have to go somewhere else where they think that maybe they can build a better future for themselves and their family. It's a really big decision. And when people are making that decision en masse to the tune of hundreds of thousands in these states that we mentioned, there's something going on because those states all have things in common, both the states that people are leaving and the states that people are going to.
That's right. We PRI put out a study this week. It's called California at a Crossroads, and it kind of looks at California certainly in a host of categories on the economy, and kind of focus on this. Where do we compare to the rest of the country? And part of it is, where do we stand on jobs in the economy, key sectors leaving, private sector jobs on net or leaving the state. But very interesting measurement in there is on, California has an income premium compared to the rest of the country. It's about 20%. And that makes a lot of sense on paper, right? But when you add in the cost of housing, the cost of taxes and your tax burden, and the cost of energy, that 20% income premium compared to the rest of the country turns into a 35% income deficit. So in other words, you have 35% more purchasing power for the same amount that you earn if you were to move to another state. So all the things you say are right. Yeah, it's a hugely disruptive thing to move across the country to another state, especially if you have no base there, right? But boy, when you look at the numbers that way, it's no wonder people are picking up and moving and are continuing to move.
It's not surprising. And to tie back to the persuasion of folks who think a little differently, then, well, what would we do to try to turn that around? Part of it is to frame things in their terms. How are you going to pay for all the welfare programs, the increased education educational spending, et cetera. How are you going to pay for those things when your tax base is shrinking, and especially the people who contribute the most in their taxes, the high earners, when they're leaving, because they're the most mobile. They can just pick their company up or just go remote, whatever, because they create so much value. They leave and they take their $250,000, $500,000, $1 million AGI every year, and it's gone. All that tax money leaves. How are you going to pay for the programs that you care about when your budget, when your tax base shrinks?
Well, the good news is in California, our governor says none of those things are happening. So we've got that. Josh, I want to thank you so much for a great conversation. I do highly recommend the book. It's quite compelling. Probably anyone has something to learn in it. So as we close out, we'll close out in our normal way. Call our podcast Next Round because of PRI's proximity to Napa and Sonoma wine country and our love of discussing public policy over a great glass of California wine. So what beer, cocktail, wine, or other beverage could be non-alcoholic are you enjoying these days that you can recommend to our listeners?
The beer, the wine, cocktails, maybe those are in most cases evening or late afternoon drinks. I'll go for a morning drink. I think it's a bit of a hidden treasure in America. Kona coffee for espresso, but Kona coffee in general, Hawaii and Kona. If I want to celebrate, so something really great happened, I have a little bag here of Kona coffee. I'll grind it up, and the flavor that brings to my morning is remarkable. So I think it's some of the best coffee in the world. You know, just across the Pacific a little bit from you, with our Hawaiian friends and neighbors. So that's what I reach for when I need a really great way to celebrate in the morning.
And you got to get the real deal, not the Kona blend.
No, got to get 100% full Kona. So not the 10% with 90% of God knows what in there.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Again, the book is How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art of Science of Persuasion, and it's available now for pre-order at Amazon and all your favorite online bookstores. Best of luck with the book, and I hope you'll come back again.
It'd be a pleasure. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks to everyone for listening, and check out the book. I think it'll be of great help.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.